Thank you so much for coming.
I feel honored to be invited back and totally honored that you're going to come to the workshop.
I know. I'm so happy.
I'm really joyful about that. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm very happy. How to produce joy. What is going to be this workshop about? Can you explain a little bit to the audience?
At one of the darker moments of my life, because I read a lot about the stories and narratives of people and cultures, I read a story about the myth of Eros and Psyche, love and soul. And the end of the story ends in joy. A child born of joy comes from the union of love and soul. And at that moment I figured, well, if I could understand this myth, I have a chance to bring joy into my life and into others. So I've studied the myth for many, many years about the stages of challenge and initiation that one has to go through after the honeymoon effect is over in a relationship, whether it's a personal relationship or even a business relationship, whether it's a lover or a friend. The honeymoon ends, and the story talks about 4 different stages of challenge that one needs to go through, and if one succeeds in going through those challenges, they birth the union of soul and love creates joy. And so the workshop's going to go into the stages of it and kind of a map, a roadmap of if you practice it and live it, you have a chance to have more joy than you do.
Okay, good. It's always, I notice that of all the things I did in my life, I'm not an example, right? But of all the things I did, it's always about discipline and practice to really achieve whatever you want in this life.
Yes, it is.
Or canceling the mind, or meditating, or doing, it's always like a training to deprogram yourself kind of thing. Is that correct?
Absolutely. No, it's I like to call it an initiation, a transformation, or a transition, as your topic of your theme is how does one let go of their attachment to their last belief system to open up to listen to another inside or outside and get out of our narcissism. And so the initiation is how to realize you're stuck in your inflated ego's narcissism and keeps the healthy ego from emerging and being there to take action on the dialogue that goes on with you and another or you internally. So being an initiate, the initiate has to go through letting go of their attachment to how they see the world to see the mysteries of life. And when one lives the mysteries of life with themselves and in relationship, that is the discipline, is to get out of the ego's addiction to how it sees the world and it, quote, thinks it's right, rather than one of multiple pieces of information. So yes, it is a discipline to admit you have an addiction in the ego at that thought that keeps the healthy ego, because the ego is this phenomenal resource.
Okay, wait, I'm going to pause you here because I'm very curious about this. I have a doctor that sometimes is in my show, Dio San Miguel, which is an outstanding doctor, and he does Qigong therapy.
Qigong?
And he does spirituality,
Fabulous.
well, a lot of things.
Yeah.
And he said to me on Monday that we spoke here on the phone live in the show, he said, you got to kill the ego, and I don't agree with that. Is there such thing as killing the ego?
I believe that you cannot kill an archetype. You cannot be attached to it, as most spiritual traditions talk about not being attached. And usually when people say kill the ego, they mean kill the attachment in the moment. But I believe surrendering the ego's attachment is the way you get the ego out of the way to do the work he's referencing. But it's common as a warrior to think that you have to attack, and that is one approach. Usually, in my experience, if you attack the ego, it comes back quicker.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking.
Turns up the volume.
Exactly. So what would you do? Surrender?
So the first thing is that we talked last week about the 6 steps, which to me are magic.
Tell me about it.
Let me go through the 6 steps. So first of all, you have to be aware that you are attached at an ego level. So you'll notice it in a negative feeling or competitive energy. So the first thing is to notice that there's something going on that isn't in symmetry, happiness or joy. Let's say joy. And the second step is to ask yourself what it is that you're attached to. I call it an expectation or an idealized fantasy. Second step, your psyche amazingly will give it to you clearly and to the point almost always. The third step is to image putting it in a balloon, image putting it in a fire, one has to put it in an image because the mind at the deeper level codes in images, not words. Words are descriptions of unconscious images, so when people try to get rid of things, they try to get the thought out of their mind, they try to kill it. Unless you get to the image structure that where it's coded, you don't have a chance to have a moment's break. And the fourth step is if right after you surrender it, pop it, throw it in a fire, you listen to the first thing that comes up in your body or your psyche, which is one's intuition, and grab one's intuition. One has the wisdom of the conscious and the unconscious mind, the wisdom of who we are as people. And believing your intuition, regardless of what it says, and when I do this with people, they're always amazed that they want to discount it right away. But I encourage them not to. And the fifth step is to take it and do something about it. Say it out loud, write it down, dance it, sing it, play music to it. And the sixth step is do anything you can not to have an expectation or an idealization.
That is perfect.
So once you get to, once you get to your intuition, your authentic soul is talking to you. And then you take the conscious ego, the healthy ego, and execute and take action on what your soul's guiding you to do. But most of us have been trained to have a warrior attachment ego, defeat the other, ... And if one is aware and is willing to go through a thing that takes about 3 seconds to do, 4 seconds, and makes it a pattern that they do regularly, something magic goes on. I'll give you an example. Yesterday I was working with a woman who's an architect who said, we went through this, and she said, I was reminded her of something we talked years ago. She said, I can't remember that. I'm a visual person. So I said, well, why don't you draw and paint and make a little sketch? So right away she did. She took out her iPhone and took a picture of something I had in my office on her iPhone, and she's going to put the 6 steps right in it, and she's going to have it be the front face of her iPhone. Because to be conscious is to remember patterns that are not ego attached, but patterns that come from the soul. When you're touching the invisible soul, it becomes visible and becomes matter when you take action on the soul. Most people take action on the ego belief system, and that works at a certain way a lot of the time, but it has a limit and a ceiling, and doing that, and then when you reach your ceiling, letting it go by knowing it's got a ceiling and open up to the wisdom of the unconscious, then you get the both and rather than the either or. Okay.
I have a personal question. This has nothing to do with your book or what you wrote, but you're such an interesting person to talk with that before I jump to the rest of the questions that I have that I pull up from your book, I want to ask you something really personal, Howard. We live in a world where 80% of the people are so superficial and they just don't want to connect with the truth. We said that before. Why do you think this is happening in this planet?
Well, we've been trained to believe in a certain, what I call a solar dogmatic belief system. And since Western culture has created a myth that's a hero's myth, not as a twin heroes myth, because a big thing that my book points out and that changed my life is acknowledging that there's 2 heroes. And Western culture has just trained us and brainwashed us to believe in the warrior hero rather than also the spiritual hero as its twin. And this goes right back to the basics of matter. Explaining twinning is probably the most tricky thing to do to people because it's abstract, it does this and it does that. But the greatest example I think there is when the universe exploded 14.7 billion years ago. I don't know why they can't say 15. They think they know it so well. But 14.7, and matter started occurring. There's matter and antimatter, and they're twins. And matter, that was way before there was the matter to make humans and make life. But energy has a twinning component to it. In quantum physics, it's the wave and the particle, which was the revolution that changed the world and has made the world of modern electronics possible. Now, even scientists don't really focus on the wave and the particle as twin consciousness. I talk about the solar being the particle and the lunar being the wave. And if you hold this twin consciousness, you can take both and spend more of your time having balance. But one has to admit that they're out of balance.
So 80% of the people are out of balance, basically?
Yeah, they're living in a life of matter. or a life
I know.
of reaction to it,
A
because
reaction to it.
so they're not holding the sacred space of both end. And this is an energy dynamic. This is not a psychological dynamic. We're made of energy, so it turns out to be a psychological option. That's one of the beauties of having the conscious ego mind. The healthy mind is we have options to change in 6 seconds something psychologically, because they've discovered recently that the brain is plastic. A lot of people don't realize that. It's called neuroplasticity. I grew up thinking, you were who you were at 4, and that was it, and you had to live through it.
That was it. I know.
And that's the scientific solar model of reductionism. But the truth of the matter is, and this is one of the greatest things about living now, the options to be conscious in a new way, where you can align yourself with the logic and nature, which is twinning, and keep looking for both end. If your ego gets attached, you can't see the other. Whether it's a person you're talking to, you see your own thoughts, but you don't really see the other.
You can't. That's why I see that there's not connection in people. People just blah, 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 talk, and they don't listen to each other. I see this dynamic constantly.
So again, when I'm aware that I'm not listening, when I feel for example, I can be being a wounded introvert, I've become a talker person. Mm-hmm. And I can tell when I'm over talking. I try to pay attention. That's a shadow of mine. So when I become aware of it, I'll surrender my ego. I will stop and I'll say, would you please repeat what it is you said? Because I didn't hear it. And I'm amazed at how little I really heard. The other person will say it because they remember it. They're sitting there wanting to be heard. They're sitting there for hours wanting to be heard. Once I do that and then give them empathy and acknowledge the truth that they're seen and heard, they trust and they're open, because it's such a rare experience to really be seen and heard, that we're all defended against it. So we shut down, not because we don't have a lot to say or a lot to be seen, but we don't have a trusting experience that we're going to be seen by another. So becoming aware and opening up, and particularly in personal relationships, but in all walks of life, that there's something besides how I see the world, and I'm curious to know how this other viewpoint is. Right away, you're in twinning without even using the word. And using the consciousness that I feel of twinning as a mindset has sped up the reality of me living there almost always.
Good. We're going to go to a break right now. Fast forward the commercials. Okay, jumping to...
Do I get to ask you a question?
Yes, go ahead, shoot.
So you said,
journalist.
would you consider possibly coming back if you could live in telepathy? And you don't have to answer it.
Oh, no, I can answer it right away. If I would live in telepathy, if
there was a telepathy, you said you wouldn't come back. But my point being, if you have mutual empathy in an individual relationship, there's a telepathic communication that gives you an experience of what the next life could be like in the way you just described it. So mutual empathy is the path to telepathy and a change in chemistry.
Yes.
And it requires getting out of our ego again, and the chemistry changes, and that's where the high comes and the joy.
I'll tell you that. I'll answer this right away. I would come back to this world if that would happen and if I wouldn't have an ego.
And you could create that in any moment in your relationships with others as a lifestyle while you're here.
Of course. No, I agree with you.
And I know you're working on it, because that's what we've been talking about in between. So it's the same theme about touching the 98% of the mind. 20 million bits of information is processed in a second by the unconscious. 20 bits of information is processed by the ego. Now, they're dynamic twins. And the ego and the unconscious, when they work together, do things that have never been possible before. And empathy is the bridge to create the drama and the energy and the chemistry that is so delightful, that comes in your music and who you are as a personality.
Oh, thank you very much, Howard. That's really, I feel so good. I have to invite people over to say these things to me. People have the tendency to fight me back instead of appreciating me, but that's good. I don't care, because I don't take things personally. But when you come along and say these things, I'm very grateful. Seriously. Okay, I want to jump to the questions, because I have a lot of things to ask you. There's a part of your book that states, to be emotionally intelligent or sensually aware, I love how that is stated, is often misinterpreted as being weak and is, therefore, often considered a liability. People who have strong lunar qualities tend to not seek the spotlight. We have learned to polarize ourselves in ways that are unnatural. Now, I agree with this, all of this, but at the same time, it's a whole system that backs us up to not have this balance. So I guess my question is, how does a person break with a pattern of strong solar light?
Well, I had a personal experience this weekend, and this has been a very common experience in my life, where I've been told not to be emotional, be logical, and being emotional makes you vulnerable. And
true.
I have empathy for being asked that, because I've been told all my life being emotional and being intuitive and being lunar is wrong. And so it took me many, many years to appreciate that if I have empathy and listen to my intuition and listen to my emotions, I can be vulnerable with people that can handle it, and people that can't, I choose not to be. So I've chosen more and more people that I can express my vulnerable side with, which is at that point not being vulnerable, it's being real, because otherwise you're in a mind-body split. Because the mind makes up a rule system, the body is driven by emotions, and if you're not living with a both-and, then you have a split, and then you have warring factions internally and in dialogue. So to me, one can, again, surrender their ego and express their emotions, their intuition, their art, their music, their sharing of their authentic creativity, which exists in everybody on a human level, regardless of where their ego has been trained. Because again, our brain is plastic, and if we can let go and are willing to and have the courage, it's really the warrior.
Or knowing, too, because people just don't know.
There are signals. There's plenty of things that you can learn that are your personal signals, so you can do it. But it does take the real authentic courage of the warrior, the spiritual warrior.
But Howard, not everybody is a warrior. I have friends that just don't know what's going on in their lives, and they try to be happy, but they can't, and they don't understand why they're like that.
And if you gave them some feedback, would they listen to you?
They do, and they take everything I'm saying, but then they go back to their patterns.
And if they practice the 6 steps, and they won't be back in their patterns, they'll have an option to get out of the pattern. Yes, the brain has 2 information systems, a pattern recognition system and a spontaneous information system. And if you are addicted to a pattern recognition system, you won't get new information in to mix in. The new information comes in, and it may become a pattern, or it may just drop out. So yes, you have to practice making room for the new information from the environment, because they've discovered that it's environmental information that changes who we are as people. And if you're in only the part of the brain, the solar part of the brain, that's a pattern recognition system, and that's a phenomenal part. I don't have to think about walking anymore, because I've got a pattern recognition system of walking. So
exactly.
I celebrate it. And if I'm addicted to that in all walks of life, including my thinking, I'm not going to let in the new information that's being bombarded trillions of bits every moment. So yes, people do have to practice. It's a discipline. It's a way of being.
It's a way of being. And
it's a lifestyle.
What about people that do recognize that they're wrong, do recognize all the things, but they feel a victim about their situation?
My whole book is about how most of my life I felt that way, and had the best of training, still felt that way, felt extra despair about it, and a very simple way I found, which is the solar lunar path, that has made me no longer a victim and at all. And if I do feel like a victim in the moment, I can surrender the attachment to that victim feeling, listen to my...
Is that a program, the victim feeling? Is it a program?
Yeah, it's we're programmed by Western culture for the hero and the victim. And every hero has to have a victim to defeat. That's the whole training. Be better than, be competitive at a level of not... And I love competition. I'm incredibly competitive. And it's either for the higher evolution of oneself or to defeat the other. Most of us have been trained to defeat the other. And so the other ends up being a wounded victim or fights back. But it's getting out of that binary model of hero-victim and getting out of and if you're in the lunar and you see it's your art, and if you see it's your soul, rather than the victim, and you ask your soul, what do you want to do to express yourself? And you have the courage to express yourself. Most of us have been shut down in childhood, in a way that we have to break this childhood patterns of taking the risk to expose ourselves when we were put down for our authenticness and told to be in a program because they couldn't handle our energy. They couldn't handle our thoughts. They couldn't handle our intuition.
Understand us or whatever
so
it was.
again, this very simple, it's almost that simple, Cecilia. It's scary how simple it is. Then you have to have the courage to live the freedom of being creative. Myself included, and most people I work with, that ends up to be another issue they have to deal with, is are they really willing to let the ceiling go and listen to themselves and be vulnerable and live it creatively? And even if people don't accept it, will they hold it themselves and not feel inadequate?
I agree completely with you. You know, an exercise that I practice when my ego attacks me, or whatever you want to call it, I always say, this is not who I am. I'm my soul, and my soul is pure, and my soul is love. That's the exercise that I always say, this is not who I am. I'm not going to recognize myself with that image or that thought.
That's why this story of love and soul that we're going to do at the workshop is one of the greatest stories of all time.
I'm so glad I'm going to be there.
It's got Eros and Psyche. Now, Psyche is actually the root word of psychology.
And I mean, while you talk, I want to put this again here, like that people... Adam or Renzo, can we do like you can't do a close-up of this, right? Oh, there we go. Perfect. This goes on September 22nd, 2012, of course, this year, from 1 noon until 6 p.m. 5 hours. This is really...
1 to 6, not noon.
1 to 6.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll call 1 noon, because in my country, when we say 1, it's not noon.
Right.
1 to 6 p.m. How to produce joy. I want people to see
it. Can I say it's at the San Francisco Zen Center?
I forgot that.
Parking can be tricky.
Okay.
And call my number, 415-407-8701, if you can't see the number on the flyer, because I have no idea if there's going to be 5 or what numbers, and the room only holds X.
Okay, so it's 415-425-6515 if you want to reserve, because we don't know how many people are going to go there.
Or 415-407-8701.
Okay,
if you
perfect.
Can't,
Perfect. This is held in San Francisco Zen Conference Zen Center.
Cecilia, what you're saying about yourself, though, is the wisdom that all of us have. You came across this story in yourself your own way and are living it. And all this story does is articulate the steps for us that haven't discovered it authentically like you have in your life. I'm a person who needs the steps. I didn't discover it in the way you have. We all have our different ways. However, you're living the myth of Eros and Psyche, love and soul. That's what you said a few moments ago.
Yeah, of course. I guess there's different methods, but I mean, the one that you just told me, which I didn't get in that part of the book yet, it's very interesting too, because it's like an exercise that walks you through the steps. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think it's great. Let me jump to the other question that I have. As a psychologist, how do you help somebody that is not seeing the truth of who they are? Because needing help doesn't mean necessarily that they have the tools to resolve their problems. Even in your book, you stated that you couldn't find an outlet to help yourself, trying all types of therapies.
Well, I'll give you so if somebody comes in for a session and they come back, no matter what they're stuck in or not, they're there to learn and work. So if somebody keeps coming back, they're there whether they can admit it or not, and we'll get there, because I'm pretty direct. Another story a client of mine told me that she wanted one of her friends, a couple that was really in trauma and tragedy, to come and see me. And they looked me up on the internet and they saw I wasn't traditional. And so they didn't come. So, I'm going to be authentic at this point in my life, and some connect and some don't. So usually people find somebody in their life, it doesn't have to be me, they find somebody in their life, if they will ask that question, they'll get the feedback if they'll listen. Or they'll choose not to choose a person, and that person may or may not. That may be the thing that couple needed, was something new.
Right.
And so they're going to choose not to. And she told me enough about them and told me the therapist they chose, and it'll be what it is. This is a different organizing. This is nature's system. This is not Howard's system. This is how nature operates, is through light and water, solar and lunar, wave and particle, matter, antimatter. And this is just getting the ego, training the dogmatism that we've been brainwashed to let it surrender for a moment so that these deeper truths can be there.
Okay, now I'm very curious about something personal that happened to me in my life. I'd always like to put examples because I think it helps a lot of people, because a lot of people went through the same thing. I met a person a long time ago that when I met him, he had all this connection that we have when we talk, the spiritual, the theory of things. He understood things in the same way. He had the same perspective of life that I did, or that I do. We're going to a break in 1 minute. I'm going to ask this question, then you'll answer it back when we come back, because I'm very curious. And he had all this knowledge and so much information about all the things that I believe in, that I think this life is made of, and everything. And of course, I got involved because I thought this person had the same perspective, and then it happened to be that in practice, it was the opposite. So let me pause it there, because I really want to know your answer about this. This is Lost in Transition. You guys in TradioV.com. I shall return. Please stay tuned.
I used to be somebody that couldn't talk.
I know.
So I want to give... There isn't anything that I've seen yet, personally or professionally, that if somebody doesn't try over time, takes a lot longer and a lot of discipline, that you can get there. Don't give up, no matter how dark it is.
Oh, nice. Thank you for that. Howard, let's go back to this question. We were discussing this off the air. I'm very curious. This person that had it together with his knowledge, and I'm a faith believer probably because I live like that. Everything that I have observed or read or did, I took it to practice. Because if you just say about it and you don't just take it to practice, it's like nothing.
Right.
This person really triggered, something in me that I had never felt before. Like, how could this person have so much knowledge, so much creativity, spirituality, whatever it is? And then all of a sudden, I see in actions after 3 months that he is a dark human being, full of issues of ego, of narcissistic, whatever you want to call it.
Sure.
How come? And I know that I'm a very perceptive person. I pay a lot of attention to everything, and I really listen. After 3 months, how could somebody be so opposite?
What you're describing is somebody that's inflated on the lunar. He wasn't living his solar symmetry. So his mind could do all this at a brilliant level, obviously.
Brilliant level.
And
it was like a play.
And when it came down to living it in his body, he didn't know how to take the risks to live it. And when it was confronted with you saw the split of opposites, the tension between opposites. And that there's Western cultures built on the Hegelian model of thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Well, that's the heroic model. And he didn't live the twin hero model. And you would think that somebody that was that brilliant in wisdom and knew the material and could vocalize it and be articulate and frankly seduce you with
totally.
I agree. Would live it in his life. And many people don't live what they say. They don't have the integrity to do it, because integrity requires humbleness. And it requires a livingness of it, not just in the moment to have a relationship that you want, but you have to do it as a lifestyle. And that requires one to have the healthy ego and be taking the risks. And he obviously didn't take the risks to live what he knew, so he was inflated in the lunar. And his ego body, because the solar ego, you have to have enough of an ego to live it. And he didn't have enough of an ego to really incorporate it and see the beauty and the joy that comes from the integration. So most of us are caught in the tension of opposites.
Okay, wait, because I lost you there. You said he needs to have enough of an ego, but I think that he turned into be only an ego-centered person.
Exactly, but he was hiding in the spiritual world, and so many people. And honestly, in the Bay Area, there's a lot of spiritual people that do more things go on here maybe than any place in the world. And that doesn't mean they're living it in their life. But
how can you preach about it and emanate this light? Because I would see light in this person, and I'm not tricking myself, or I'm pure, like I'm going towards the truth, and I'm like, okay, really like analyzing it. He would emanate light, and he would be full of joy, and all of a sudden this dark creature, and I'm like, where did this come from?
My book is about the twin lights. You saw the light. You didn't see that there's light in the darkness. The great stories of mysticism are to see the light in the darkness. And because he blinded you with light, as a lot of people do when they first meet, you didn't see that there's a dark light, which is being willing to admit your shadow.
Am I too innocent? Howard,
Not
this is not happening.
Not anymore.
This is not happening.
Not
I got
anymore.
burned with fire, man.
Well,
Let me tell you, okay?
You learned it. Well, that's one of the initiations in the Eros and Psyche story, is how to find your authentic fire after you've been burnt.
Oh, good. Well, I hope. Listen. And if it's not in this planet, it's in the other one, please, but not again through that story. Let me jump. Okay, that was a personal question. Thank you for responding that. I'm sure a lot of people go through that. I never been through that in such a extreme way.
No.
I've been with people that, talk and do.
Sure,
but this is like, oh my gosh, it's like totally like, he looked like a spiritual leader and he was just like the opposite. I'm like, how can you be so far away from what you believe?
Many of the spiritual leaders that have been around have huge shadows. And over time, if you look back, their shadows show, and they can be abusive. They can be sexually without boundaries.
Oh, okay.
There's many, many things that have gone on and will go on, quote, with spiritual masters and spiritual people. Again, to me, it's the both and.
And you know what? It's something that is really true, and I always say this. You got to rely on actions, never in words.
Yeah.
Words are just so vague, and it's just like not real. You just have to see and follow through the actions of people. It's always like that. The next question that I have is, what about people that are homosexual? What role does lunar and solar light plays there? One of the most creative and happy people that I know are homosexual.
Yeah. Well, they have it down. They have, because of all the shaming and abuse, they have found their souls and admitted who they are, usually early in life or later on. I've worked with huge amounts of gay friends and clients in the Bay Area, but they got the lunar down. And
they got it down.
They got it down, and they also
and they're warm-hearted
and they've
creative.
had to survive, and they're oftentimes very successful.
Yes,
because they have had to survive. So they got the both end in many ways that many straight people don't, because they've had to find their soul and admit it and not deny it.
These ones didn't have a choice, I mean, because homosexual people, they have to.
I work. Most gay people I know knew it when they were kids, and they had shame. They were in the closet. Many, many things happened. But at some point, regardless of the massive prejudices, they've had to admit it and be who they are. And when you are in integrity in who you are, without the labels or after all the shaming, you find the light. You find the light if you live in integrity and admit who you are. I actually think one of the enormous things, because I grew up in the 70s in San Francisco when the 70s and the 80s were really happening pre-AIDS. And it's amazing to me that there actually is talk of gay marriage on ballots in politics. Because when I worked in the 70s, when people were in the flooding to San Francisco, my gay friends and great people I've had the privilege of knowing and working with, were in the closet. Now, my first client was a professor of law at USC who wrote the first book on gay law, which honestly he dedicated to me. But people were in the closet. People are not in the closet. I don't care whether it's about homosexuality or creativity or vulnerability. If you have a shadow and it's in the closet, you're fragmented, you're split, and you're going to not be able to live in integrity like this man you were talking about couldn't. Yeah. So, there's a beauty to having been oppressed by a culture and a world, and that I know many gay people who have suffered deeply, still do, haven't healed the wound, and the world is changing, and it is so many things are options now to not have to spend as much time. I measure health as how little time you're caught in the shadow. Not that you don't have a shadow and a cultural shadow, etc. So one can minimize their time in the shadow personally and in relationships. If my way is the 6 steps, there's 12 steps, there's whatever.